In 1992, Sony brought out the NT-1, aka the Scoopman, a pretty unassuming looking pocket dictation machine. To the casual observer, it appears to be much the same as any other microcassette recorder of this era, but in fact the rather pedestrian looks of the NT-1 concealed an incredible piece of engineering. For a start off, it used a new type of stamp-sized cassette that could hold up to 2 hours of audio. It had a battery-backed-up clock that saved the time and date of each recording to the tape. But the main difference between the Sony NT-1 and any other miniature tape recorder on the market was that this recorded digital audio in stereo. Amazingly, inside that case is a tiny rotating head, which uses helical scanning, a shrunken version of the kind of mechanism you'd find inside a video recorder or camcorder. However, the NT stands for non-tracking, which relates to the fact that unlike most rotating head systems, this one doesn't need to pull the tape out of the cassette and wrap it around that head. Instead here, the tape is just pushed up against the head whilst remaining inside the cassette shell. All this cutting-edge ingenious tech didn't come cheap though. The NT-1 cost 100,000 yen, and when it was launched in the US, it was $1,000 US. Now, bear in mind, that's 1992 money. With inflation, you can more than double that for an equivalent modern-day price. It's also important to put this device into context by mentioning that 1992, the year it was launched, was also the same year that Sony launched Minidisc, and that could record digital audio onto magneto-optical discs, which held up to 74 minutes at launch, a number which later increased to 80 minutes. When it came time to refresh the design of the NT line in 1995, it was decided that this was going to be the final tape-based dictation machine from Sony. Digital voice recorders had taken over this role, and with their instant access to recordings, they were far more convenient than winding a tape. Minidisc was also well established by now, and these were getting smaller and their prices were reducing, so there was very little need for this tape-based NT digital recorder range. It's amazing they even decided to do a refresh at all. These were not big sellers. However, I read a story that due to the fact that the long-established tape-based dictation team was going to be disbanded after the completion of this NT-2 project, that the Sony management decided to give them almost free rein to produce the very best product they could with very few limitations. It was going to be one last hurrah. You can't imagine any company doing something like that nowadays. They were creating a product they would be proud of, a swan song, and here's what they produced, the Sony NT-2. It's a beautiful, desirable object which I first showed 10 years ago on the channel. It truly is an incredibly pleasing device to hold, with its rounded off corners and premium feeling magnesium alloy construction. Its inviting appearance encourages you to pick it up and examine it. Of course, this tactility is especially appropriate for a dictation device that's very likely to be held in the hand whilst being used. As well as the obvious physical improvements, like soft-touch controls and an enhanced display, an important addition was a digital buffer which held enough audio for the tape to auto-reverse while still playing or recording completely seamlessly. Now, back when I originally picked this up on eBay from a police surplus auction, I didn't have a great deal of information on the NT-2, but in the years since, things have progressed quite a bit because I became more than a little bit obsessed with this fascinating machine. And I'm not the only one who thinks this is a very special object. In this book, they devote a number of pages to the NT-2, in which they talk about this being perhaps one of the most Sony of all Sony products, a device made with incredible attention to detail, one that encompasses years of technological developments into a compact jewel of a device that was anticipated to only sell in very small numbers to a very niche and well-heeled clientele. The book mentions that the eject lever was designed to evoke a mechanical camera's winding lever. A button would have worked, but this device was focused on being pleasing to use, even if that made the price even more unobtainable for the average person. Now, unfortunately, I can't find a Western retail price for the NT-2. The Japanese price was 128,000 yen. And bear in mind, the original NT-1, that was 100,000 yen. And that went on sale with an RRP of $1,000. So you're very much likely looking at a price of around about $1,300 or so for the NT-2, and probably a similar amount of UK pounds. Now, inevitably, whenever anyone shows an NT cassette in a video, people will reminisce that they had an answer phone that used these tapes, or that their dad had a dictation machine that used them. However, the reality is that there were only 3 devices that used the NT cassette. There was the Sony NT-1 and the NT-2, and then the Datasonics Perios data backup system, which LGR has made a video about. It's more than likely that people recalling a tiny cassette from their past will be thinking of the Philips mini cassette or the Olympus micro cassette, both of which, while small, were considerably larger than the far less common Sony NT. For such a tiny cassette, the NT came in these quite large storage cases, but these would have made them slightly less easy to lose, and they also contained a set of stickers and index cards. And once those are removed, the case itself can then hold a total of 4 NT cassettes. So, fully loaded with 120-minute tapes, this little box could hold 8 hours of digital stereo audio. In amongst those pieces of paper are instructions regarding the Write Protect system. Each side of the cassette has a small red plastic insert in the top left corner, and if this is pushed inwards, it activates the Write Protect for that side of the tape. And then to reverse that, you just push it back from the other side. Now, back when I first examined an NT-2 10 plus years ago, I mentioned that the audio quality was way more than was necessary for a dictation device. First off, it's stereo. It's got a sampling rate of 32 kHz, 12-bit non-linear, which is mentioned as being equivalent to round about 17-bit, which all suggests a dual role as a personal stereo for the business traveller. It originally came with an inline remote and stereo earbuds, and it's got a bass boost option, which is something unnecessary for a device just devoted to dictation. The one fly in the ointment in using this as a digital audio player, though, was the fact that the only input on the device other than the microphone was a regular analog input with no optical in capability. So seemingly there was no way to get digital audio into the unit. Now, looking into this eventually led me to acquiring another boxed, lightly used or possibly ex-display example that I imported from Japan. This one came with all its accessories. That included the inline remote and headphones, which appeared to be unused, in addition to a multi-voltage power adapter, stereo audio leads, and a stereo lapel mic. Oh, and a really nice little carrying case. However, the main reason I bought a second NT-2 wasn't for the accessories, it's because the auction included 2 boxed items. One was the NT-2, the other was the NTU S1 docking station. Now, this device expands the NT-2's inputs and outputs, most importantly by adding that missing digital input, enabling full digital recordings to be made to those tiny tapes. The 2 devices interface by way of a concealed edge connector, which is hidden behind a spring-loaded shutter on the back of the NT-2. Now, it appears that the docking station wasn't sold in the West. The English language instructions make no mention of it in the accessories section, whereas the Japanese instructions do refer to it as a way to make digital recordings from CD, minidisc and DAT. It's really no wonder that Sony decided to keep this accessory away from the West. After all the hysteria, panic, litigation and interference that was heaped on them by the RIAA when they attempted to launch DAT, which effectively killed that format, it was wise to restrict the ability to make digital copies just to customers on their home turf. The dock just didn't contain extra inputs and outputs, it also converted the sampling rate. So you could hook up a CD player via optical and copy its bitstream across to an NT tape in real time, and the dock would take care of converting the 44.1 kHz 16-bit of the CD player to the 32 kHz 12-bit that the NT could handle. Now, in order to give you a demonstration of the quality of the audio, I'm going to record from a CD over optical to an NT tape, and then I'm going to play that back to you. Now, in order to give you something to look at while you're listening to this, I'll show the setup and playback process I went through to make this recording, but bear in mind that while you're watching these visuals, what you're actually listening to all the time is the playback from that NT cassette. Now, I'm sure you'll agree that the quality there was more than adequate for most people, myself included. However, this is really far from being a suitable replacement for a regular personal stereo. First off, the playback time from a single AA alkaline, it's just 3 hours. You should also avoid using those 120-minute tapes, as they're not only prone to dropouts, little breaks in the audio every now and then, but they also have a tendency to wear out the clutch mechanism on the fast forward and rewind. And talking of dropouts, you'll need some cleaning cassettes to ensure the head is cleaned regularly to avoid them. And good luck finding those. It took me years. Of course, this is all academic now. We're just talking about history. Even if you could find one of these old machines, which would probably cost you quite a bit now, and then some tapes for it, nobody needs one of these. Just use a smartphone like everyone else. But even back when this was a contemporary device, there were far more suitable options available for most people. But looking at this as a historical object, I still can't help but admire the technical skill that went into creating this. The NT is truly a bizarre product. It was one that was superseded by another product from the same company as it was launched. But there's just something about the tiny tapes and the ingenuity of the miniaturized mechanism with its spinning record head. It really was a showcase for what Sony engineers at that time were capable of doing. The only problem is that hardly anyone got to see one. Clearly these sold in very small numbers, but that makes them all the more interesting. The model I picked up from eBay in the UK around about a decade ago had the serial number 501243. Well, the one I bought on a Japanese auction 5 or so years ago was 503666, so less than 2,500 apart. I'd be surprised if Sony even sold 10,000 of these. But while Sony made plenty of odd devices over the years, this is perhaps the most Sony of Sony products for me. Oh yeah, and I mentioned that I've had this set stored away for quite a few years, but recent events have reminded me that nothing lasts forever. I've had devices that have died in their boxes before I've had a chance to show them working in a video. So I decided that I really should get this one out and show it now while I still can. I hope you've enjoyed having a look at it, but that's it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.